Welcome back to Fix and Rex, a fanfiction podcast. I'm WMN. In this episode, I get to chat with a regular Joe about her early fandom and fanfiction experiences, as well as the inspiration and process of building her modern AU Bridgerton series, The Equation of Us. The following selection is from Chapter 7 of Don't Read the Last Page, But I Stay, the second story in the Equation of Us series, written by today's guest author, a regular Joe. This story is rated teen and up. For more information, please reference the tags in the episode description of this podcast. Penelope, can you sit back, please? The light is making your goose look congealed, the truly Prue cameraman said apologetically, adjusting his lens. Pen smiled wanly and pushed her hair back. Oh, keep your fringe untucked. Continuity, you know? Look celebratory, Portia ground out, her lips straight and in a tight smile. It's a holiday. You are enjoying yourself. Right. The incredibly festive holiday of December 23rd. Pen muttered darkly. Christmas always came early at the Featheringtons, so production didn't have to pay the crew holiday time. Pen hardly believed in holiday magic, but even she had to admit she was feeling especially low this year. Char had been exceptionally Scroogey in her pursuit of the Sharma Sisters cover, and, very unrelatedly, Pen had not spoken to Call in nearly 2 weeks. He'd texted her, of course. Colin could never let things drop, could never let silence settle into spaces. First, rambling apologies for kissing her while she was going with Harry, then incoherent irritation that she had simply left him on read, then succinct, for him, concern. Oi, Pen. You can hate me forever and I'll deal with it. Just let me know you're okay. Please. Just let me know. Okay? Thanks. XX. C. This is my Christmas special and you're ruining it! Prue whinged, stamping for effect. The least you can do is end all this unattractive moping. Pippa smugly sing-songed. Cheer up. We're rich and famous and it's Christmas. What do you have to skulk about? She hummed. Honestly, I thought dating Harry would make you more pleasant. Because you're getting laid? Prudence spelled out. Penelope, would you like to tell your family what you're upset about? The AD Carissa asked from off-lens. Absolutely not, Pen answered firmly. All right, then. Pippa, why don't you tell your mom how Portia deciding to go to Majorca with Prue instead of to your party in St. Bart's makes you feel? Carissa said without missing a beat. She was used to Pen's non-participatory approach. Part of it was simply that Pen could not mention Vogue House on camera, and earlier Violet Bridgerton's disapproval loomed larger than any legal threat. But an enormous portion, Pen admitted to herself as she stabbed her glazed carrots, was her annoyance with her mother and sisters and their grubby, petty obsessions. The way they needed to perform their little luxuries and their social standing, somehow always in ways that inevitably depleted said standing. The way they all happily traded their dignity and sense for cold hard cash, through this stupid telecontract and Sasha's shady connections. I'm not mad at you, Mummy. I just think you're awfully silly, Pippa clucked, taking her cue. Sasha's rented a yacht, Pen's silent brother-in-law nodded. And it's going to be the most exclusive party in the Caribbean. Pippa's guests were usually of the louche Greek shipping air variety, but few viewers knew the difference between a prince and the prince's coke dealer if they both wore Gucci. Did you hear? Margot Goring has completely abandoned Wilhelm, even though they're as good as engaged. She just simply moved in with her 19-year-old toy boy. Willie found out through her Instagram stories when they were in Greece. She took a bite of her roast potatoes, waggling her eyebrows lasciviously. All of that oil money literally flushed into the Mediterranean. Pippa was mean, but Prue was obvious. Didn't most of it get flushed into it already? What with Willie's father's Monte Carlo gambling problem? Prue giggled riotously. Jade, Mrs. Goring, is going to be devastated when Whistledown reports this tacky behavior. Portia cackled. Pen stopped cold. She had been cataloging it for later, already sifting through potential puns and witticisms. It was simply, nearly 2 years into this, an automatic process. Pen observed something interesting. She put it in the right frame and tone. She published it. While she had a wider audience than her family, was what she was doing with Whistledown so different from them and their mean little whispers? She wasn't doing this for some pathetic score settling. She'd removed herself from this gossip ecosystem ages ago, neutralized herself into invisibility, and Whistledown was satirical, not vindictive. There had been some personal incentive to start it, of course, but she'd conducted it nobly enough, using her voice to shine a light on their world. It was legitimate enough that Shar considered it journalism, swept it up into Tatler. Not that anyone knew it was her, of course. But people liked and respected and feared Whistledown. They didn't like or respect or fear Prue and Portia and Pippa. God, you are all such hypocritical snobs! Penelope burst out almost before she could help herself. Do you hear yourselves? Perhaps Helen loves this boyfriend. The room fell deathly still. Penelope, come with me. Portia took a large gulp of her Chardonnay and shoved her chair backwards. Don't follow and cut the mics, she ordered as she swept past Cassandra. Biting her lip, Pen followed reluctantly, guilt knifing through her. Portia, resplendent in hot pink Jenny Packham sparkles, paced. Her short, grubby fingers, perfectly manicured, dripping in high-quality fake jewels, tapped her crossed forearms as she stared at her youngest daughter. I'm sorry, Pen started. Shar's been on me, and I haven't seen Harry, and... Do you know what your problem is, Penelope? Portia cut in, irritated. My problem? I'm not the one making fun of the Gorings in front of a national audience. God, her voice sounded so small. You have at every turn been given the option to not be on the show, Portia said, her voice tight and rushed, like she was negotiating a deal for Prue. If you don't want to be here, don't. You've lived in this house for 25 years, Penelope. You know where the door is. Pen was taken aback. It's Christmas, she retorted, chilled. You're kicking me to the curb for Christmas? We would miss you, but it's your choice, Portia replied. We love you, and we would celebrate the holiday with you later, and we would respect that. She snorted. You have a funny way of showing it, and you have a funny way of accepting it. Portia still looked very angry, her nostrils flaring in short, tight bursts. You think your attitude of being above it all makes you better than us. She crowded Pen's space. You may not like some of the choices I've made, Penelope Jane. I may not like some of the choices I've made. But I'm not ashamed of them. Portia's pixie cut made her look like some sort of warrior, blazingly strong and fiercely proud. I'm not ashamed of the show or how I've helped your sisters. I am proud of what I did. Your father left me with nothing but debts, and I saved this family's good name. I provided for you girls. I am the reason we have everything. I am the reason you get to have your heirs, and your job, and your public school education, and all the party invitations you covet, but scorn. My work. My sweat. My ideas. Even now in the dark of a hallway, only her daughter as an audience, Portia glowed with determination. So maybe you ask yourself who the snob is. Portia inhaled very, very slowly. Pen squirmed, then stilled, pinned in place by the truth spoken and her mother's clear gaze. She saw her own reflection mirrored in Portia's irises. I know you work hard, Mama. I'm grateful. It sounded hollow even to her, and Portia scoffed. You're ashamed. And so ungrateful, Penelope. Did you realize that we know? Oh, you spend your whole day wishing, trying to be someone you're not, hating who you are and who you come from. You think we're beneath you. You absolutely can't bear to be one of us old birds. And that shame, and all of this, her voice was a hiss, is on you. You did not need to do this show, Penelope, but it is important to this family's survival. What you cannot do is go on the show and ruin it with your eye rolls and your arch comments and your coy little looks when you think the camera isn't watching. She raised an eyebrow. Now, it's your turn to choose. Finish taping this dinner, finish filming Presents, or go to bed and never do the show again. She strode past Pen, right back into the dining room. Pen considered all her options for a second, considered fleeing, considered apologizing, considered moving out entirely. But instead she just nodded and trudged behind her mum. Penelope is feeling better. She just took ill for a moment, Portia announced as they re-entered. Let's go back to Sasha passing out the potatoes, shall we? Penny, you want? Sasha asked, holding the platter up with a wide grin. She exhaled, giving herself an extra second. Yes, she finally said, clearing her throat. Yes, please. Reset. Roll tape. From the top, they went through the whole scene again, passing the food as if it was the first time. Pen listened half-heartedly, smiled when it seemed appropriate, spoke when spoken to, but a familiar wave of self-loathing, sharp, bilious, metallic, churned through her. She knew the sensation intimately, from school dances when boys had declined, in uni when Elle had rushed off to cooler activist friends, at clubs when throngs of dancers had turned away from her and her sisters, mockingly muttering, "Old birds," under their breath. When Coll ditched her birthday party to hang out with Freddie instead. She wore the anger as comfortably as she wore her favorite Miu Miu dress. That was to say, a tad too tightly, and in a way that she was always aware of its presence. She never quite forgot it, even as she loathed it. But this time, it was sluiced with guilt, settling like oil into the pit of her stomach. Her mother, with all her silly proclamations and cheap schemes, had her dead to rights. Pen was ashamed. Of her family, of herself around them, how they reflected on her, how they were her. They represented everything that she hated, that she tried to stomp out about herself. But she'd never be fully rid of them, would she? Because she realized with a sinking stomach, she, Whistledown, was them too. From a captivating story to the mastermind behind it. Welcome to the podcast, A Regular Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And just please call me Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Before we dive in, do you have any questions for me?
I don't think so. This is my first time being on this side of the interview. So we'll see how it goes.
When were you on the other side of the interview?
So I started in journalism and now I do communications. So like earlier this morning, I was like doing talking points for somebody else's interview. So like that's kind of the world I live in most days.
Wait, have you revealed that you're background is in journalism? Are we allowed to talk about this, by the way? Because I want to be sensitive.
Yeah, we can. We can in like very high level ways. But I think some people know that. I don't know if it's always come through some of the like. I leave a lot of endnotes, and I've been around fic for a very long time, so I have no idea what's honestly out there and what's not.
Yeah, I love your endnotes personally.
Well, thank you.
Wow. So your background is in journalism. Mm-hmm. That is very, very cool to know.
Yep.
Okay, so before we dive into the Equation of Us universe, which is how I always say it in my head.
Oh, I call it the Usverse at this point. Like, it's just so long to say.
The Usverse.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we talk about the Usverse, I like to start interviews by talking about authors' fan fiction origin stories. So which fandom brought you to fan fiction?
Okay, well, I am super old, and I think that hopefully gets missed a little bit online, but I feel like I've been writing basically my whole life. I found it when we were cleaning out my mom's house. Before my parents moved, like 45-page stories that I wrote in like third grade, stuff like that, when I should have, again, been like doing better, like other things with my time. And then
Do
like,
you remember what you were writing about?
my mom, honestly, like, I remember her now being really upset because like all of my stories, you know, between the ages of like 8 and 12 were about like this girl who was like deeply misunderstood by her family. It didn't matter like what the context was. And then something like horrible happened to her family and she had to like cope with it. And my mom's like, what have we done to you to deserve this? And the answer was like,
you have been writing angst since third grade?
yes, like, you know,
That is a really great BTS.
like, she's in a car accident. She's like lost in the woods, things like that. And my mom's like, truly, what have we done to deserve this? You have your own bedroom. We have a nice house. Like, just chill out. And she was like, mostly right. Like, therapy in my 20s worked out the rest of it, but she was mostly right. And then I want to say like I started like discovering the internet and fic sort of just around the same time. And I don't think I have like a really long history in fandom. Like one fandom before this, and then Bridgerton is the only fandoms where I've actually like had conversations with people, chatted, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's been like purely writing and commenting.
So this is the fandom that you've engaged in the most?
Yes, that, and then the one just previous, since sort of the origins. And like, I think it started with West Wing probably in like 8th grade. So that for me was like the 3rd season of West Wing.
What about West Wing was like, I need more?
It had such sharp writing. It had such that like, that vibe of like, your coworkers becoming your family, which when you're like 14 and like a high-strung perfectionist, like has a lot of resonance.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of Sorkin still in my writing today. If you think about just sort of like the dialogue and the speed. Yeah.
Sorkin is a master of ensemble, master of juggling a million story arcs. And
like my actual like first time like joining the message boards to like share what I thought and blah, 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 was like an episode that was written because Aaron Sorkin himself had gone into the message boards the year before and started arguing with people about them critiquing the show. And so then he went and he wrote an episode about the moderator being a tyrant. Which, like, why pick fights with, like, why do that? And all of this went down, like, right before he was, like, arrested for shrooms, and, like, the show kind of went to hell in a handbasket. But like, it was a really good, I thought, like introduction to fandom as a community, and then also just like having actual conversations as a fan, which I think is something that like is a little bit lost today. But then like I was writing some fic for that. I was writing some fic.
So you wrote fan fiction for West Wing?
Yes, I did. A lot of it was about, shockingly, like this young girl from the Midwest who like was Donna's niece and then like ended up having to like move in with them, and who knows, I actually forget some of the plots. But it was like West Wing, and then there was a lot of like CSI around that time. That was a lot of self-insert there too.
So what drew you to CSI. What drew you to that? Also, lots of story arcs, lots of characters, ensemble.
Yeah, I like ensembles. I also like honestly like do like a good procedural in terms of like
Yeah.
you sit down, you watch. There's long-standing storylines, but like procedurals, like when you think about it, I think are like a really good way to acquaint yourself with like structure.
Yep.
So, like, I think that was always really fun for me. And then I got really into, before I left for college, like Grey's Anatomy for a while, actually.
Yeah.
Like, that was my
Hello, Shonda Land.
first introduction to Shonda. Yeah, I started
High
on,
drama.
so much high drama.
And it's that mix of episodic and story arc as well.
Yeah, and just, you know, like world building where I'm like, oh, I could fix you
Yeah.
if you just gave me a chance. Yeah, Shonda and I have had a long-standing history about whether or not her shows do world building.
Yeah, if you're a Grey's fan, you've been through stuff with
I've been
Shonda.
through so many things. I was a fan when like Izzy tried to resuscitate a deer. Like that
Yeah,
was we were there.
Grey's is one of my I'm gonna weep forever because I officially will never get over George not choosing Callie.
Yeah.
I can call it official now because how many years has it been since he chose Izzy? So I pretty regularly check the George and Callie tag to see if someone has fixed it for me. And alas, no one has.
Still not. You could fix it.
I could. I'm a collaborator, honestly. I'm my background is performance and acting, and I did do
Very cool.
I did do playwriting, but it was always in ensemble.
I've never, like writing for me has always been such a like solitary thing, so that's like
Interesting.
really cool. I love hearing about other people's process.
I love to be in a room with a writer. Give me a writer, I'll hang out all day, every day. And I do in fan fiction.
That's really lovely.
All right. So, I knew I wanted to talk to you. I was overwhelmed, but I was like, listen, let's just go in and let's see where we go. Because the thing I know about you is you know your stuff. I read all of your notes. Like, I know we're just going to have a conversation.
There's a lot of research.
But
yes.
honestly, I'm a little bit overwhelmed and I'm just ready to dive in. Having said that, I'm also nervous and I do want to be transparent. And I've already talked to you about this, but I want to be transparent with everyone else too, is that a bit of my nervousness comes from the fact that I'm worried about misrepresenting my values. And I didn't know what you were expecting of me as a reader when you came into our conversation, and I didn't want to blindside you, so I did tell you that I'm an Indigenous person displaced by colonialism, so I'm decidedly anti-monarchy. I'm anti-billionaire. I personally do not find wealth in and of itself compelling, like, at all. It's not what I seek as an escape. So, and I say all of that, and I told you all of that knowing that that's not what you were communicating. You were not communicating a celebration of those things. I don't think that the us versus trying to say it's pro any of those things. In fact, I think it's pretty critical of the institutions. So yeah, the social commentary is one of the things that interested me the most about the stories. And I said all of that to you, a regular Joe, and to your credit, you still agreed to talk to me. So yes, once again, thank you for being here with me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I appreciate the candor. I mean, I think like for me personally, like I have like general feelings on like who should be taxed more in terms of like billionaires and corporations need more taxes, things like that. But I don't think that like, and I hope that like Us First is like much more of a set, like I find rich people fascinating in sort of a like, wow, you really like this is how you live, this is how you think, things like that, like social commentary, like does this make you happy? And then I just find often like things like the royal family to be like just such both amazing gossip, like the way that like Scandival was gossip last year. I loved right now there's a meltdown between it's a queer Desi couple that's having a breakup on Instagram, and I've spent most of when one of them cheated on the other, I've spent like the morning following that. Like there's just like gossip and how information is transmitted is super interesting to me. Gossip or like stories about people often get such a bad rep because it's like, quote unquote, like women's stories, and it's not, masculine or whatever. And then just like, for me, it's also always very interesting, like on a human level, like what story you're telling yourself about your action, but then on like an institutional level, like the PR behind it and the machine behind it. And like, is this like communications that is like achieving your goals? Like Michelle Obama, I was always like fascinated because she was so good at this, just like the fashion diplomacy, and how she would pick clothing to like communicate to other people. And like, she was often just like flawless in terms of like what she wore in different countries and what new designers she uplifted, things like that. And so just like, to me, all of those things are like really fascinating. And I think that's why I ended up going in this direction when like I got sort of the Bridgerton bug than if, going in something like a Regency direction.
What's interesting? And so like when I read it as a reader, where I'm coming from is there's a level of distance. So I didn't read it to escape into this world. I read it to be like, this is fascinating to me to take into account wealth. These characters have hundreds of extra years of accumulated generational wealth.
So much wealth.
What do the Bridgerton characters look like after all of that time accumulating wealth, all of that time playing the game of wealth? And honestly, that's why I chose the excerpt that I chose. That scene with Portia and Penn, I just thought and it stuck with me the first time I read it. Every time I read it, I was like, that's the excerpt that I want to read. Because everyone is gray in this universe, because you took into account wealth. And you cannot make it to nebulous modern AU kind of our world and not be a morally gray character in this universe. And so you having Portia and Penn go head to head was just, to me, so interesting. And her having that recognition that, yes, she is playing the game as well. I don't know. That's just, to me, I would love to hear what you were thinking when you were writing that scene, how you crafted that the Featherington family.
I wanted you to be as a reader, in Penn's mind and like root for her, because like she roots for herself. Like you always are the main character in your own story. But like she has not, throughout 200 plus pages, 200 plus thousand words, like ever realized that she has power or she has an impact. And she just is like everyone. Like she looks down on her mother. She's very judgmental of her sister. She thinks everyone is tacky. And then it's her mother just like reading her dead to rights and just like having that like shift in their relationship where you're like, oh, Portia knows Penn, and like Penn feels just so pegged in that moment in terms of like, oh, you are exactly right. But then it gets like bookended with Portia being like, like I did what each of you needed. Like one of your sisters needed the security. Like she was the oldest. She saw how flawed our marriage was. She needed financial security. One of you needed attention. One of you needed to go on your own journey. And then she's got like that little, nest egg for Penn. And it's like there if Penn chooses to accept help. And just like, I just really love.
Yeah, it's such a really cool way of bringing the I am a mother moment, because she's flawed. Portia be flawed.
Portia be very flawed.
But Portia be very flawed. But being maternal is a huge part of Portia's role in the fic. And so I really appreciated that connection to what we knew of her from canon.
No matter where she is, just give me Portia. Like, she's great.
Samesies. And Portia's a very controversial character. And I get it. I
get it. I do.
I understand it. But yeah,
yeah,
some people are like, if Portia gets a redemption arc, it's over. And I'm like, oh. I just think Portia would be fun to have around, honestly.
Yeah, oh my God. So I love the Portia and Penn dynamic just in terms of like
Yeah.
they are I think match of equals. I think for as much as Penn is repelled by her mother and, her mother's, desires and wants and fascinations. And I think this is true in the show as much as it is in the Us-verse, where just like she thinks her mother is repulsive and tacky and, money grubbing. And Portia is Carol Middleton. She is Kris Jenner. She is your tacky pageant mom from a TBS show. Like, she is a character. And so like when I was sort of like ending and when I was like conceptualizing sort of the full universe and like really when I was beginning All's Well, like I had no idea that I would still be writing this all this time later or that I'd even do a second volume and dive into like Colin Penn. But a lot of it was really like sort of like identifying and like naming like the traits of the characters and like sort of mapping them to people or situations that like I've been reading gossip magazines for 20 years. I've been watching, I've been following fashion for that long. I've been watching British romantic comedies like since they were a thing in the 90s. So just mapping those two sort of things that I love. And the dynamic with the sisters was really sort of inspired by a lot of the like I think they get called the old birds. And like Kate and Pippa Middleton in the tabs in like the aughts when like tabloids were being, so heinous to women, like they were called the Wisteria sisters frequently because they were like socially climbing and their mother was like,
I did not know that. So that was the birth of Old Birds. That's where Old Birds comes from?
It was a reference to sort of like, and Carol Middleton was often called Doors to Windows because she was she had been a flight attendant when she met their father. So like you get these really like derisive nicknames you see like in the same, like Eugenie and Beatrice, there's definitely some of them in there as well, where like you just saw a lot of this coverage, like calling them fat, calling them ugly, calling them horse-faced. And so sort of like grafting that onto the Featherington experience and really like, I think Polly Walker is amazing. She can, chew all of the scenery that you want to give her.
I love her so much.
And so just like her with like kind of like a tight Kris Jenner coiffure, like was a strong visual to me. And then I was just like, okay, like what would Penn think are the most embarrassing ways to hold on to wealth? Like you establish that this family has lost money throughout the generations. All they've really got is their house left. Portia like married their father so quickly that she didn't even realize he was broke. She just assumed he had a title. And I'm like, what are the tackiest ways that would like be most embarrassing?
And it's very, very topical modern AU of you to bring in reality television and bring in social media because it's not even like old money versus new money, which it is, but it's gathering money from social media, gathering money from selling your selling a persona,
selling parts of yourself.
Yeah. And I know that the show does say that they're the Kardashians, but they say it, but we don't get to dive into it. So it was very cool to see you dive into it just a little. It wasn't the central theme of everything, but to dive into that aspect of it within this universe that's a little bit dark, that takes into account wealth and what it means to different people and how people,
like what lengths they'll go,
the different ways that people want it and what they do with it. Yeah.
And how much like they'll do to get it.
Yeah. And to keep it.
No, it's very Saltburn. Like as long as you have enough money to like make a problem go away, like do whatever you want in your personal life.
Every time you would write things like that, I'd be like, yes, I'm so glad you said that out loud, because I'm thinking it in my head. And so every time you write what I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, yes, I'm so glad that's part of the narrative that we say out loud, because a lot of that stuff is implied, but we need to say it out loud.
Yeah, and I think it's like ultimately, like, I really like Succession as a TV show because it is just so kind of like gross and uncomfortable, and you don't like, I remember a lot of people being like, but I loved Roman, and then like, spoiler for Succession, like he's trying to actively like sell the state of Wisconsin in a presidential election, and they're like, that's my bro, and I'm like, have you been watching the same show?
Yeah, I also appreciate shows that aren't afraid to make room for sometimes uncomfortable thoughts or conversations. And even within the Bridgerton-verse, Queen Charlotte let us be a little bit darker inside the world of Bridgerton. And so to me, it lets me know that Shonda does also understand that there's a messiness in this world, and we kind of choose to not delve too deep into it in the main series. But just Queen Charlotte starting out that, like, it was not white benevolence that we got a black queen. It was an accident.
Yeah.
And to save face, they continued on. And so to me, that was like, yes, Shonda understands that this world is messy, and she's not going to have us. She said it on the outside. She said that she's not going to have us believe that the reason that people of the global majority exist in the Bridgerverse now is because of white benevolence. So,
yeah, I have a lot of, as I said, like I've been following Shonda watching Shonda for like 20 years, and I do think like she has, or her shows often have, like I don't know who's making decisions. And I like look at the kind of Queen Charlotte narrative that they put forth, and I look at, in season 1, Danbury saying her kind of speech to Simon, and I'm like, you guys actually are really trying to often like play it both ways, and like I'm clearly somebody who cares so much about the world building, like not just from a like detail perspective, but like from the world you live in dictates your character's actions and makes it grounded and real and things like that.
I held on to that Lady D speech because, like I said, where I'm coming from, I get uncomfortable when we talk about monarchy.
Yeah.
But, I wanted to know what that meant to the world of the series. I personally am okay that we just get it hinted at that it's deeper because there's no time. And in Queen Charlotte, they gave us Lady D's speech about her ancestry. They gave us that it's not white benevolence. It's black women specifically that are the reason that any of the gains discussed on the show have a lasting impact. I also don't want to do the thing where I expect black and non-white creators of color to be everything and do everything when there are a lot of very popular, very historically inaccurate shows by white creators that people consume without a second thought. And I'm just happy at the end of Queen Charlotte that we have discussions open. But also, it's why I was so fascinated by yours in particular. I kept thinking about Queen Charlotte as I was reading the Osverse. We got to dive into some things that are more uncomfortable that I don't consider like escapism, but that I consider really interesting, and that I'm thankful that we talk about it within the context of Bridgerton, because me as a watcher of Bridgerton, as a reader of Bridgerton, I come from it from the point of view that I come from.
Yeah.
Having said all that, I understand, and it's cool to hear your thoughts on it, because I know you're a journalist. Now I know that about you. I know you love details. If anyone reads the Usverse, we know you love details. So to hear you, that's your response to it, that totally resonates for me in terms of what I know of you and you as a creator. You love details.
I do love the details, yes. Just even like the clip that they released of season 3 with Kate and Anthony dancing, like was Bridgerton to me as a viewer, like has always been something that is a little bit like better than the sum of its parts. And like that clip to me really exemplified, like, here are the things that I love. And like, I am leaning towards positive, like excitement and like giddiness, and like the two of them just like dancing and flirting, and like him dancing with her, you know, one more time than is de rigueur. Like, it is romantic stuff indeed. Like, that was all there, and it was great. And at the same time, I'm like, why are you wearing a boat neck with bra straps? Like, why is your hair like this? And to me, like, that's not, and I'm sure when the show comes out, they're going to like make a comment specifically about like how Kate is dressing differently now because she's more comfortable, because she loves Ant and she's got his love on her side, whatever. And so she's more free to be herself. I'm like, but those clothes also are not, as far as like, I did 25 minutes of internet research into this, like found some books, dove in. I'm like, that's also not what was being worn, in Mumbai at that time. So how did this fashion come about? Like, what is the rationale here? Those are things that I always like really care about.
I think that I just saw a YouTube video about by fashion historians where they rate all of the historical fashion in the shows and movies of the year, and whenever they get to Bridgerton, they're like, "Oh, bless."
Yes, no, it is.
Bridgerton is doing their own thing.
And just like, why does this dress have bra straps?
Yeah.
I also like, I critique, and I'm also like, I've been watching Chandra for literally now 20 years.
There's a lot of suspension of disbelief in Shonda Rhimes.
And so I'm there for the ride. And then like what I do is like, I respond with like fic in terms of like, to me, like the Us First did kind of start as like a fix-it fic in terms of like things I loved about the show and like found compelling enough to watch season 2, especially on repeat for like a straight month, and then things that I'm like, if I would do this, like, you know, you wouldn't have this, and so maybe I just like go in there and fix it.
But let's dive into the beginning of the Usverse with all's well that ends well to end up with you. I do want to know, like, what was the moment that you said, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this fic.
Well, like, I literally have some texts to a friend who I'd met my last fandom being like, oh my God, I think I might actually do this again. Am I losing it? And I'm like, I have this, I had started a Regency fic.
Wow.
In response to season 2. No, I made it though about maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs. And I started to write something about a teal dress. And then I paused and I was like, would we say teal in 1815, or would we say like peacock?
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
The color of peacock. And so I like go down. I go down a rabbit hole, and it takes me like 10-15 minutes to find out. No, the color teal was like named specifically around World War I. And I'm like, I can't do this every single paragraph. Like I can't. I will drive myself to the brink.
Yeah.
I just remember after doing that, like really starting to be like, I was actually like kind of looking for modern fics, and I wanted a modern fic world that was really drenched in wealth. And I was seeing a lot that like kind of shied away from that, where like Ant was maybe, or Antony, I call him Ant, was like wealthy, but like not going to Eton and hobnobbing with the Prince of Wales wealthy.
Yeah.
And Kate was like less wealthy, but like even in the show, like Kate and Edwina were like raised in a palace. Like their father was in show canon, like an advisor to a ruler. Like they're not like destitute. They are very well off. Yeah. They're just not at this level. And so and I was seeing like a lot of like very sort of lower middle class. And so I was just like, that's also doesn't feel like true and real. And honestly, like what really first sort of, I was like, okay, like also like if it was modern, like Ant, I was not even reading anything where like the love triangle, like why would Ant in a modern world want to date Edwina? Like what is the character motivation there?
So you got that initial inspiration.
Yes.
went to think about it as a Regency fic, and then
I couldn't do Regency.
it would be so much. And then from that moment where you decided it was modern AU, you dove into building characters? Or
really sort
what
of
was
like,
the process
no,
like?
I started with the world building and like the world building
Okay.
and the puzzle. And I really sort of set out with the goal.
Yes. Tell me about world building, because your world building
Yeah.
is huge.
Yeah, so it's something. So a lot of it really started with really just sort of like, again, like I have a very fluent relationship with pop culture
Yeah.
and celebrity gossip and sort of like the business of celebrity and the power of celebrity and sort of like how do you set an image, things like that. A lot of interest in not just fashion, but a lot of fashion diplomacy, as we talked about. So
Yeah.
it really started with, I guess, like first mapping sort of every single character to a real or fictional modern stand-in. So like it started
So a
with
little
like,
bit
okay,
character, a little bit.
a little bit, but it was a lot of like, yeah, kind of putting everything into a blender. But like
Yeah.
Aunt and the kind of Bridgerton family like took a lot of inspiration from the Grosvenor family, which is the family that owns a lot of Mayfair still to this day in London. Kate was pretty clearly Amal Clooney in terms of like inspiration, and just like she's got this like deeply badass career, and then she's got like, you know, an Anne Ken husband who happens to be George Clooney, who's like pretty down bad for her. Penn really came from like the world of like Bridget Jones and kind of pulling that in. Also a lot in this then came through in the second book, or the second volume of Andy Sachs, Anne Hathaway's character in Devil Wears Prada.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Then obviously, like we've talked about, like the Featherington sisters, like coming in from that angle. It was a lot of Ben is sort of like Richard Avedon. He's a little bit David Bowie. He's a little bit Prince Margaret's ex-husband, Tony Snowden. So like these like artsy, like bisexual, creative genius dudes. Call kind of really came a little bit Bear Grylls, a little bit Anthony Bourdain, a little bit Prince Harry kind of came in. Yeah, that's kind of
My husband, Bear Grylls.
yes, just like this genesis of like this very well-educated like British man.
We should end the podcast because that BTS alone is amazing. I love that.
And then, yeah, just like, and then like Edwina as kind of an Emma Raducanu character. And then Sienna gets to be a little Ellie Goulding, a little Meghan Markle.
Yeah.
And so just like really bringing all of that in and just kind of mapping these characters.
That is really cool because doing that gives you, in a way, a kind of roadmap that you can ground yourself in.
Exactly.
Yeah. That you can keep the characters consistent, because I will say that that's something by the end. So again, like I saw it was like homework, but not bad homework. Fascinating homework. Because I was like, is this going to remain consistent?
I did my best.
Absolute consistency. And that makes sense because you grounded each character into their own reality.
Yeah. So it was a lot of like, yeah, just like pulling from.
And that came before the storyline. That all came before you decided what the story was actually going to be about?
I knew the story was going to be sort of a modern retelling of season 2. And so what I sort of committed to early on in making a lot of choices was like, from like a writing standpoint, like I had done a lot of like character work and character writing, but I hadn't actually done a lot of plot writing. And I have a friend who talks about how you're either a plot writer or a character writer. And I think I started as a character writer and ended very much as a plot writer. I'm also like very action oriented as a person often. So I like committed to it being a modern retelling of season 2 where I'm like, okay, like if you have these character traits and we've sort of like turbocharged them up to like this is them in a modern London that is like very close to our reality, but not in terms of like our relationship to wealth, and race and socioeconomic status. Like,
but then in Don't Read, you add Queen Shar, which, you know, is that other aspect of this world as well.
Yes, and she is Anna Wintour, like straight up and down. So after I committed to like, okay, this is a modern season 2 retelling, and what the like goal is, like what we are going to do is tell the story of season 2 with the characters, but they're going to be modern, but they are the same characters. So with that in mind, like what decisions would those characters make in the modern day? And so like if you've got Ant and Kate as these like super emotionally repressed oldest siblings who like can't like recognize their own feelings, and they both have all of this responsibility and all of this duty, and like ultimately the love story there is like they feel very lonely and they find somebody to like,
and they have shared trauma, which we don't get,
but it's there. You get like a nugget. Right. So if I'm putting those two characters in a modern universe, and Ant has decided like he needs to get married, he has a title to pass on, like he's got to do these things on this timeline.
Or it's just a checklist.
It's total checklist. And then Kate has like all of these responsibilities. And I think I made her motivations like they weren't as clear as maybe they could have been. But she is like so overwhelmed and so worried about everybody else that like the space she leaves for herself is like minuscule. And she has all of these like short-term relationships like as stress relief kind of in her past.
What's the clear connection for me for Kate to canon is family. That family is everything
absolutely.
to her. And then that's also what differentiates her from Sienna as well. Mm-hmm. And I love that you did not vilify Sienna. I was very thankful that you didn't. But they're just, family is everything to Ant and family is everything to Kate. And that's something that connects them. And it's not for Sienna.
Yeah, and like it's very, thank you for saying that. A lot of commenters very much hated Sienna and like very much made that like really, really known. But like, so I put those two.
I always appreciate when people don't vilify her. Anyway, sorry, you put those two together.
No. So I'm like, of course they're going to like hook up immediately. Like to me, that was like so clear. Like, of course they're going to hook up at the very beginning of this and insist that it means nothing. Yeah. And then of course, like all of these disastrous things follow. And then like, it became very clear, like there did need to be a second romantic interest for her aunt. And it was like, obviously not going to be Edwina, who's like 22 and having her own drama.
And her
like,
sister.
Yes, like that's just bad. So like then it becomes like, okay, like, well, who else could this be? Who's that character? And it became really clear to me that that character was going to need to be Sienna because again, we're in this like really deconstructed version of Bridgerton. And then like kind of following that same logic, like you get to really dive into kind of Pen's motivation. To me, it was like, of course, Pen and Call are going to like sleep together because she's like, yeah, I'm a cool girl. Like I can just, fuck around. Like this is great. Of course that was going to go in that direction. Yeah. And I think one of the like early decision points and something that like got very, as a writer, like I really did need to wrestle to the ground is like how far in this modern social media landscape can Pen go with Whistledown without becoming an irredeemable character or without like becoming somebody untrue to the core of Pen. And so like I came up with like these character beats and then just really committed to like driving through like, okay, like if you're putting these characters in this modern world that we've just built where like Ant is now the 16th Viscount, this family is worth, I think, $15 billion, which is an insane amount of money. And they are...
Did you calculate that? How did you calculate that?
I did, yes. So
I knew you did. Tell me.
So as I said, I think the family is based very much on kind of the Grosvenor family on one end and then the Van Cutsum family on the other end. And they're both sort of like peers of the Will Harry kind of cadre of royals. But the Grosvenor family started out in like the early 1700s, basically as merchants, and started to accrue wealth. And eventually they received a title from the crown. And the crown kept over like maybe 150, 200 years elevating their titles. So I think they at least went from Earl to Duke. And the first Duke of Westminster, which is their family title, was the last duchy handed out to a non-royal Duke title that could be passed on. So they're like the very last people in the door. They are the newest money of the oldest money, but they're also the wealthiest. They have a group today still, Hugh, who is about 33, and he's going to get married this August, and it's already like blowing up the society pages because he invited William and called Harry to personally tell him that he couldn't come because the brothers can't be in the same room anymore. And like, he's a godfather to both of their children. Like, it's a whole thing. And it matters a lot to these people. I started from this fact of like, and very interestingly, in the research process, like a lot of these ancestral homes like basically went cash broke, these families, in the 90s, because... And you
touch on that with Edmund.
Exactly. So like I was like, okay, like, well, that would have happened in the family, and that would have been, I think, like a big driver for Ant as he's like 18, 19, has just watched his father die, like feels like he caused his father to die because like he wanted him to come to his polo match, and like realizes that the family is like close to broke. They have 50 million in the bank. So really started looking at this family's, the Westminster group or whatever they're called, how much they have, looked at all of the fortune lists of like youngest wealthy people in Europe.
Yeah.
So his family owns Highclere Castle, which is the castle used in Downton Abbey. And so like I was at the point in the research process where I literally like started searching, trying to figure out what that licensing deal had been worth in terms of like filming and all of the attendant tours and things like that, like what it would have done to this family's wealth. And really started like piecing things together from that level. And so I got to the point then where I had a sense of what the pot could be. And I landed on a number that basically would assure that every single Bridgerton child, as Simon explains, is basically set up with a trust that will pay out $20 to $25 million to each of them indefinitely for the rest of their lives. Like I wanted it to be really soaking rich. And like to get to that level, like what pot did you need to start with?
And it was 15 million or 15 billion, sorry.
Yeah, that's how we got to that number. And then did all of that.
That's research. I knew that was the research. I read 15 billion and I was like, I know there's research that went behind that. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, there was literal math.
That it started with the family and then you did calculations to get to what you considered to be fully set up for the rest of your life, like stinking rich, like never truly ever having to worry about money for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And then there's a number, and that's where that number came from.
Yes, and I wanted to like be very driven by like Anthony would not rest until he had gotten to the place where like he could relax a little about what his siblings would be set up with.
I wanted to ask, you said you didn't know you were going to do Don't Read.
Nope.
So when you were building this, you decided to include all of the characters. Sophie and Ben already know each other. Ellen and Pippa already know each other. Simon and Daphne are already together. But to me, that was interesting is that like you decided to include all of the characters within their story and they didn't exist in season 2. So just that decision to include Sophie, to include John, to already have John be in the picture. And then what was that moment like when you decided that you were going to make it into a series?
I mean, so the decision to include them came pretty easily. Some of it was just like gut stuff, in terms of like,
Yeah.
I knew Kate needed a friend in this world, and I knew she needed a tie to this world if it wasn't going to be the marriage mart. So having like Sophie and there's not a lot of original characters at all in this. Everyone is a borrowed character.
No, yeah.
Like I wanted all of the characters to feel very much like of this world. So like to me, like putting Sophie in early made sense, making Elle a queer character made sense, making Ben bisexual, like another queer character, like all of those felt very textual to me and also very updated to the modern world. So they all came very early. I don't think I've ever actually answered your question, but I started writing the actual fic, like the first chapter, after I'd done all of this research, after I'd put together like a 30, 40 page, like not, maybe it was like 20 pages at the start, it's up to about 50 world building document. And then like plotting out the entire story until the Sienna reveal, which is I think chapter 9 and like 100K words in. And then that's when I sort of sent a text to my friend being like, I think I'm doing this again. And that's when I actually started writing the fic. So I got
Is it
like,
the same friend? The
it was
same
the
friend
friend
who
who
got
like,
the original text?
yeah, this like was like,
Aw.
I can't, like, I'm really diving in. And then I'm like, by the way, I think I'm doing this. And she was like, good luck. I'm not in Bridgerton. You know that, right? And I was like, yeah. So she read some drafts, but she's been outside of it. But yeah, and I've always like been a solitary writer. Like all of these, like there were some chapters that went up like 20 minutes after I finished typing them because I was like, this is what it is. And I'm just like throwing it into the universe. I would say like, I won't say it's a regret, but it became, I think of writing often and I think of plot often as just like a problem to solve. Like, how do you get a character from place A to place B? I don't think like when I read over a chapter, it's very hard for me to think like, is this good? Is this bad? Like the question I am constantly asking is like, does this make sense? Yes, no, good, let's go.
Does it serve the story? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what you did. Does it serve the story? Even in this enormous universe with all of these characters, you never lost sight of the story you were trying to tell, which is commendable because,
Thanks.
the universe is huge. And I really appreciated that about it. Okay, so did you start crafting the stories differently in All's Well? Or did you continue each couple's story as you had originally planned? Does that make sense?
Yes, no, it does. I kept them as sort of originally conceived, and I wish that I had started out with sort of this in the back of my mind that maybe I wouldn't do a second volume. I think everyone but the Call Penn storyline, and I think that's in part because all of the characters are from the Bridgerton world, but none of them were in season 2, but Call and Penn were, and they had their own complete story arc in season 2.
Yep.
And so I was writing specifically like to that story arc, just transposed to, you know, Penn is doing something on social media. Call is back in London after like 5 years of traveling. Like they have this kind of arc. And because it is, I think about 2017, 2018, like they're allowed to accept, like sleep together and have it go badly. And have that be sort of the source of their misunderstanding. So like they're the only story arc that looking at All's Well, and like, yeah, I would, knowing what I know now, like write it the same way. Like I think I would have done Ben and Sophie a little bit differently, in terms of like her discontent. The like decision to have her go off to Milan like was very impulsive. Like it didn't start out with that journey for her in mind. I was just like, wow, I need something for them to do. But by the time I got to the end of All's Well, I knew I wasn't ready to leave the world. The Elle storyline was the storyline that I think like became most challenging moving into volume 2 because of how I'd sort of written myself into a corner in the first volume. Like I would have done the breakup, I think, with Dora at the end of the first volume. And like Dora is her full name is Theodora, so she is a bit of a Theodore stand-in. Like everyone is a character. But her last page storyline is a little bit like, I don't know, like it feels a little bit like a retread, like she's falling back into bad habits. And I don't know if it was like specifically like what I wanted for the character, but it was sort of like where the story had ended up.
It was a lot less Penelope's than I thought it was going to be, but that's where the story went.
Yeah, they're on the outs for most of it, but like you do really try and get to that like I think, and what I hope gets across is like the like love of your life doesn't always need to be like your romantic partner, and like they can be very significant. And for so long, like Eloise was Penn's person, and then it got to this point and you see a sort of brooding in All's Well where like Penelope is just like so full of like resentment, and she's just like constantly singing her like I want song, and she's like kind of got blinders on in terms of like what is possible for her. One of the scenes that I was adamant that I was going to write was, you know, the scene in Devil Wears Prada where Stanley, like Anne Hathaway is complaining to Stanley Tucci, and she's like, I'm trying so hard. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, you're not trying to fit in. You're not trying to have a good attitude. You're not trying your best. Like, you're pouting this entire time. And there's a scene where Nigel does that for Penn, where he's like, you're not trying your best. You're not. And like that, and then the Portia scene, I think, are really critical.
I really like the way you translated the essence of show Penelope's into your story.
Well, thank you. You know each other so well. Like, you have all of these...
You can hurt each other.
You can really hurt each other. And I wanted that hurt to be... And, like, when you have that fight with a friend
too.
And you're 24, like, that hurt lasts for years. And so it was really important to me that they, like, have this sadness and this anger with each other, like, throughout. Yeah. And then you also see sort of, like, with the Penelope's friendship, like, in last page, like, Penn begins to grow up a little bit, like more and a little bit faster than Eloise.
That is, to me, was the main theme of the fic, is growth. Even when they did the panel for season 3, that's what it was all about. Everybody's growing up.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was very cool that Don't Read focuses so much on that. And now we know that season 3 is also going to focus so much on like this kind of growth from all of them. So...
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, when I had started writing, they had started to put out some of the, like, not fan art, because it was official, but, like, artwork for the season. And so, like, the themes of, like, butterflies and flowers were really coming up. And I am, like, clearly a massive perfectionist who hates to be wrong.
So how did this affect you?
Well, so walking into last page, like, was a little bit of a, like, I knew I wasn't ready to, like, leave the world. I actually like finished and then like basically maybe a week later hopped on a flight to London for like a week and a half. And so like that I had like held off and knew I would make my decision kind of while I was in London. And I wrote out like even at the time, like on the plane, like I know what the like Ben Sophie plot is and I knew what the Call Penn plot would be. And I started to try and figure out like what would happen, which one came first.
Right.
A lot of the things I was like afraid of were like, number one, like there's very few people writing to the ensemble in the space. There felt like there was very little tolerance for an ensemble. It felt very ship warsy, which is like not my vibe. I've cultivated like I'm very big into cultivating a good conversation with people who read and are lucky enough to leave a comment. Because
you are.
I often don't work with a beta because
it's awe-inspiring.
Thanks. But
really.
But like I really truly do love it.
People don't understand it's a lot of work to respond to comments.
It is. No, but I think it is like very worthwhile because I like would often leave like book club-esque prompts and just like get really good reactions, which really fed stuff moving forward. And when you're like you don't know anyone in the fan space really to begin with, you're really just sticking to fic. And you're writing 180 to 200K words, like I don't have a beta, so like didn't use a beta on either of these. So it was like really helpful as a check. So I knew that there was like not a ton of overlap. I knew like I would have to like some audience would carry over, but like even in like, and I don't care about viewership stats, but like you can tell that like All's Well, I think is at like 110 or so K views, and then Last Page, like I check like once a week and I'm like, hooray, like like you're doing it, little buddy, like you're at like 40K, which is still great, and I'm very lucky.
Well, you also have to take into account that our season hasn't aired.
Right.
So your like, readers are really us veterans. Your readers are us people who've been in the pollen trenches.
Absolutely.
Who have withstood the test of time. This is going to get even more eyes.
Let's see. But like one of my things was like, I was scared of the success of All's Well and sort of like how would I feel trying to replicate or chase that. I wasn't sure if I could do it twice. I think and especially like, and Last Page is like much more original in terms of like, I didn't have a season to write too. And so there was like a little bit of thinking of like, should I just, wait? At the time, I thought like 6 months.
Yeah.
I thought we were getting this in July of 2023. And I'm like, maybe I just, wait a little bit and wait till I have a season to write to. And I'm ultimately very glad that I didn't, because I really loved so much of sort of the setup and the premise. But that was like a huge fear. But like one of the things that I kind of set out as a goal was like, I've read everything that was out about the season so far. I reread the book maybe 3 or 4 times. And like one of the intentions I set was like, I really wanted it to be much more thematically tight, because the world was sprawling so much in that like theme of growth and growing up. I felt was just like so important to Colin Penn, like in particular, like everything sort of like circled around like what would their stories individually and together be. But then you kind of pull in Eloise. And then because I'm like, okay, like what is the growth storyline? Like it became very easy to sort of write the Kate storyline around like preparing for this society wedding. It became really easy to write Aunt like really leaning into being the head of this family in sort of a like supportive way versus a resentful way. And then Simon, and like getting to bring in like, okay, like Simon and Daphne are at the point where they'd be having a baby. So like, let's bring in some of Simon's daddy issues. And so getting to use him there was really fun.
Okay, so since you didn't have to world build, how was the journey of this piece different from All's Well?
That's a good question. So it definitely started on that plane to London where I just like, because I know if I ever get around to writing the Sophie Ben thing, and I've put out like some timelines, they have a super quick wedding, and there's very much a reason for that, how they go from like not really speaking to married in 6 months. I knew sort of what I wanted the Penn storyline to be. And I really just sort of like started by teasing out like, okay, like the Ben Sophie storyline starts, it did then and it would now, at the Kate and Anthony wedding, which is like basically a year past the Last Page of All's Well. Like if that happened, like what would have happened in the intervening time? Like where would Col, Penn, Ben, and Sophie be? And how would that impact those storylines? And ultimately, like the fics are very much more show canon than book canon. So like that gave a strong point to Colin Penn. And then also like we have those 2 actors cast, like we have visuals, like they're very tangible characters. And that was, I think, ultimately the deciding factor. But also like there was a little bit of like this understanding that Penn's storyline in particular and this amount of growth, like couldn't wait more than a year in the future. Like it really did need to start pretty close to Aunt and Kate's engagement. It needed to pick up pretty closely and kind of continue through.
The story was very clear, and I think that's why it's really successful.
Well, thank you.
So unlike All's Well, you wrote this knowing probably, most likely, you were going to write more.
Yes, I came in with sort of the intention that, and so you see that sort of with the plotting with, like that's why Elle had to go back to Dora. Like she couldn't jump right into Piper. That's why Fran gets engaged to John. Like she, like, I actually think Ben is going to be season 6 on the show, but like in this world, he would be the next volume. So I needed to like start buying myself time for these other plots. So that's why you see these roadblocks come up.
I really like how you started introducing Michael, and how you're starting to play the early dynamics of their relationship, and how you're giving a little bit more space from John. And I just thought it was really cool. And as I was reading it, I was like, Jo knows that she's going to write more.
Yeah.
So it was very cool to read every interaction with every character, knowing that Jo knows she's going to keep writing. And you know, really, they're all little teeny tiny glimpses into the future. And that's one of the things that I really, really enjoyed about Don't Read.
And the hardest part was not getting one of the hard parts. Like last page was actually like pretty hard for me to write for a lot of reasons. But you had to also, though, like the moments in between, like couldn't be like treading water. Like you had to have a really earnest, like Piper and Elle moment, but also fully believe that Elle doesn't realize that like this woman is going to be the love of her life. You had to like, it got really hard by the end with the Fran John stuff, because there was just like not enough room to have John in a lot of scenes, and Fran scenes had to be used to shed light on other interactions, or Fran scenes kind of had to be like her and Aunt having like a brotherly, sisterly connection. And then so you get to this like proposal, and you have to believe that Fran at that moment wants to be engaged to John and loves him with her whole heart. So like that became really challenging.
That's the cool thing about you creating this series, is that even in this moment, I'm like, this is just the beginning of Fran and John.
Yeah.
It doesn't all have to happen inside Last Page. It doesn't all have to live inside All's Well. It's just little moments that when they aren't directly connected to the main storyline, they're just little moments that are for their character that I get to follow, which is just like watching Bridgerton, which is just like reading the books where you would only see Colin matchmake every once in a while, you know?
Just like flit in and out and be charming.
Because it's not about them, but at the same time, we hold them.
Yeah.
So that's why this series is so cool.
Yeah, just like slowest of slow builds. But yeah, that is why.
And you can, because of the series you're building.
Yeah, but I think I would have, like, in retrospect, like, introducing all of the love interests, like, at the end of All's Well was a little bit like, oh, I want everyone to, like, feel like they got to meet Piper, they got to meet Michael, and then I'll just go. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I'm not actually going. I'm going to stay at this party a little while longer. But with Last Page, like, it really became like, okay, like, we'd hooked onto this theme of growth, and that became really easy for the side plots to kind of come through. But then it also, like, coming back to first principles of, like, these are characters in a modern universe, and we're coming into the story, and, like, Pen and Call rightfully, like, there's a history there that is a lot more explicit than it is in the books. So to me, like, it was like, okay, like, they're gonna grow separately and they're gonna grow together as humans, and that's going to, like, fuel this relationship. But also, like, they're friends. We knew there was this, like, suitors plot, which, like, we'll see how it plays out, but I kind of love. I knew, and I really wanted it to, like, have, like, to me, the modern equivalent was a caper. Like, I really wanted it to have, like, a problem where they have to come together to solve. Like, I didn't want, so that's why, like, we get rid of the suitors so quickly.
But it's still a part of it. And I think that might be what season 3 is. I think suitors may get kicked to the curb pretty early.
Yeah, I think we're going to get suitors for, like, 10 minutes. I want the, like, shopping montage. I want the, like, girls just want to have fun playing in the background. And then it's all about, like, we solve this problem. And this problem is he finds out about Whistledown. And he's very savvy, and he's got, like, a much stronger sense of, like, oh, this could be real bad. So they have to, like, come together to solve this problem.
Yeah, what would happen if they team up?
Yes.
What would happen if...
They're just, like, good. They're friends. They're good friends. They're gonna team up. I love the team.
Lord Whistledown.
I think that's, like, the last line, or one of the last lines. Like,
yeah, it is. You're right. I just read it.
I wanted them to like be on the same team, and that team, if the trope here is like childhood friends to lovers, like to me in a very modern sense, like having to be on the same team is the way you sort of like go through that tunnel together.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, yeah, something changes.
In a car.
Yeah. Yes, it was also like I also had this list of like things that I had to hit because again, like it's deconstructed.
Yeah.
So like in volume 1, it was I have to have Ascot, I have to have them meeting rowing, not in a horse race.
Yeah.
And then for volume 2, for last page, like it was very much I need the carriage, I need the car, which is like a brand new model Tesla because it's Call using his bonus. I needed, and I really needed the mirror from the perspective of like...
Huge deal for this story. Yeah.
Huge deal in this story. I think it's a huge deal to the fandom. And like, I read all of the books. I still haven't finished book 1. It's on my nightstand. But like, I read 3 through 8. 3 through 7, and then finally I read the Grucy book right after season 1.
Wait, 3?
Sorry, yes, I started 2. I read 2 through 7 right after season 1.
You have so many references to it.
Yes, no, I've read that a bajillion times now.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
I came back and I read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton like 2 or 3 times, and I kept being like, where is the mirror scene? Like, how have I missed the mirror scene? And it's just a little reference, but it's so important to their story because I think their story is one about being seen. And so the mirror becomes like such a powerful metaphor. So like that was obviously like really high on my list.
And the show obviously recognizes that
Yes,
because
they better.
it's a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they do. There's no way.
They have
Nicola
to.
already.
They have to. But like to me, it's very much a story about being seen. So like all of those things had to be true. And then from there, just with that list and those principles, like I was like, okay, we're going to have suitors get dissolved of pretty quickly. We're going to use suitors to sort of flip the script. Like I think Call has a line, it's one of my favorite, where he's like, fuckity fuck, I might be fucked. And I'm like, yeah, you are, buddy.
Listen, the way I have now just consumed and made fuckity fuck like my whole personality for months now, everything's fuckity fuck.
Fuckity fuck.
Like everything. It's
so
brilliant.
cool.
I love it.
So I like have so many documents and notes and little things. Like one of the little things is like, once you're in the Bridgerton circle, like you are referred to by a 1-syllable name. It doesn't matter. Like I even put an all call on Twitter once and I'm like, how do you shorten Gareth into 1 syllable?
Gare?
Michael is Stir when he finally gets, full status. Like STER.
How very celeb of him.
Right. And so one of the things is like I have all of the boys, like Ant is Scotch, Ben is gin, Call is tequila. And then Ant says thank fuck a lot. Ben says fucking balls a lot, and Call's got fuckity fuck.
Ah, the birth of fuckity fuck. I'm so excited. You heard it, listeners. Yes.
That's where it came from.
That's where it came from. He had his own catchphrase.
He did. He needed to have a catchphrase. Like he just needed a catchphrase. So it was like, we're going to do suitors. It's going to be like a girls just want to have fun montage. It's going to be the impetus to like kind of flip the script. And have Call be the one chasing Pen. I really wanted to do the Christmas ball for orphans, but really children who have, terminal
It almost
illnesses.
sounded like Zoolander. Where did Christmas ball for orphans come from?
Oh, Zoolander does have the school for kids who can't read good or something, but the school is too tiny. How can kids go into this model of a school? I really wanted I never want people to be too comfortable with how ridiculous these people's lives are, or to find them to be back to like I don't want people to think like, oh, actually like these people are my friends. Like I could live this life. Like they've been hosting. It's referenced very early on, like maybe the 2nd chapter of All's Well. Like Fran's like, well, better you break up now than in December because now you can have a date to Mummy's Christmas ball for orphans, which is just such like an anachronistic word that like would be said Like, you wouldn't call
Yeah.
somebody an orphan these days. Like, come on. But then, like, it's still called the Christmas Ball for Orphans.
They're so completely out of touch.
Yeah.
Hey, wait, I did want to go back for a second to check in to see if you had anything more you wanted to say about flipping the script and Colin chasing Penn.
Yes. And I knew that, like, to me, it was very important that Call figured out Whistledown, because it was that very important that Call saw Penn when she thinks nobody else is seeing
Yeah.
her. But he's right there
Yeah.
being like, I see you. And he noticed that and he put it together, because Call is a smart guy, even if people don't always think that. So it was so important for me that, like, she doesn't tell him. He's like, I figured this out. And then his, like, response is to, like, be super chaotic and just, like, make out with her. Sure, fine, do that. And
Yeah.
someone said,
That's a choice.
right, like, he's like, I'm so angry, I just have to make out with you. Because there's mistletoe.
Because you didn't know what to do with all those feelings,
So just, like, mac on her. So, like, yeah, he needed to do that.
right?
And someone was like, I can't believe you had them come together so quickly. I can't believe you had
Oh, really?
him figure out Whistledown so quickly. Like, what's the plot going to be the rest of the...
What are you talking about? Romancing Mr. Bridgerton is just chaos.
It's so chaotic. Call is and Call is actually one of the hardest characters I've ever had to write,
Really? Why?
because he's so smart, but he's so smooth. Like, he's so intuitive almost. And so, like, I'm an overthinker, Penn's an overthinker, Kate's an overthinker, Ant's an overthinker. Ben has a lot of feelings. Al has a lot of, like, and Call's just like, yeah, my life's pretty good. And he's completely right in that fact. He's not going to overthink things. And I think for him as a character, like, so much of his journey in All's Well is just, like, him learning how to not be a people pleaser and speak up for himself and, like, acknowledge and own that, like, his life is pretty good, and that also doesn't mean he can't want it to be different.
Yeah.
Like, trying to figure out how to, like, bottle the essential chaos of Colin when I am such a detail-oriented writer was so challenging to balance, just because he's not going to explain or think these things in so much detail. I am. He's not. So how do you balance that? And
You know what I love about what you did with his chaos is you folded it into the caper.
yeah.
The caper in and of itself is like such a manifestation of Colin chaos.
Yeah, he's like, this is a great idea. This will work.
Then it forwarded the story along and there was a place for it to go.
It's such a bad idea. And, like, the other thing with Colin that I really had to commit to was I couldn't decide in All's Well if B2 was a great idea or a terrible idea. And, like, is this something that we all secretly, like, make fun of because it's such a bad idea and he's rich that it's just, like, successful. But, like,
B2 made sense within the world that you created of Bridgercore. Is it Bridgercore? What's the name of the business?
Bridgerton Group, BG, yeah.
Bridgerton Group. Then you kind of like gave us a little bit of Will Mondrich, and then
Yes.
Will's in charge of Soho House. Yes, I like, because it's just world building. It's what you do.
Yes. That was kind of a late breaking plot that I really liked. Yeah. I wish I had thought of that tie going into the writing of Last Page.
Yes, it was a good little bow in terms of world building. I was
Yes.
like, yes, you gave us like a little extra in terms of making the world bigger, including Will into the world, which Will is a part of the world.
And he runs some great nightclubs. So yeah, it was.
He's a smart guy, and he is driven.
And I think he and Call get along really well. So getting to the caper and getting to have, like, both of their, like, there were so many parts where I was like, Fic, I think, tends to be a little more Penelope focused when you're talking about Pollen. And I think, like, writers tend to skew to be sort of like identify as female. Like, it makes sense. But I really wanted it to be like a romance of equals where, like, you see these parts of balance where, like, even as small as, like, Penn realizing during her dating era that she's now slept with more people than Colin has, or him seeing her, like, all of these were very important to me in terms of, like, setting up this very equal partnership and this team. And so then you get into kind of the caper side of things.
Yeah.
But, like, the caper needed to be something where they both, like, had equal parts in setting up what turned out to be like a pretty frickin' bad idea.
Yeah.
And he did it because he wanted to help her and she thought it was a bad idea, but she didn't want to let him down. And
Yeah.
communication.
And they dealt with the repercussions together. I really, really do want to have some time to talk about what your plans are for the series. Do you know who's going to be next or what's going to be next?
So I'm definitely on a hiatus until this season comes
Yeah.
out and I can kind of get a sense of like what material is there. I think I have a kind of big decision point just because by the end of Last Page, it felt so much of it had been created, and like there is sort of a recognition that the farther I get in the Usverse, the farther it gets from the source material being the show.
So that's why I thought maybe it would be Daphne and Simon. But committing to that would be what, like, that's a commitment. Once you commit to the next fic,
It's like, yeah, they're 9 months usually to write. So that's an option. I'm working a little bit on an Edwina one shot that's just sort of this like long single, like she's not going to get a full treatment like these like, 200K words fics, but like something that's just like, okay, like this is the story of how she exits her tennis career and like pivots into this next phase of her life where she is basically like a member of the royal family, for better or for worse. If I do the
so
next...
are you is there stuff written for that? Or
There's a little bit. I really want to, with Edwina, kind of give her in this verse, what I would want to do is sort of give her back her story, because you see so much of her through her sister's eyes. And like Kate is very much like, I coddled Edwina, like Edwina was protected. Edwina never had to like take care of the family. And I'm like, Edwina is a Wimbledon champion. If you think her life wasn't hard, if you think she didn't have a lot of tenacity and heartbreak to get where she was, like, I think you're selling this girl some short. And I was reading...
As they did canonically.
As they did in the show, yeah.
So, yeah.
And I was reading Andre Agassi's biography after I read Prince Harry, since they had the same ghostwriter. And I kind of had this, like, what is this Edwina? Like, how does Edwina in this universe become this 19-year-old, like, Wimbledon champion? So the Edwina fic would follow her last 4 slams and then her wedding. Would be the premise of the fic.
You love a wedding.
I do love a wedding. I love a wedding speech. I've only given one one maid of honor speech in my life, but I think I'd be very good at it.
I mean, folks need to wake up and call
I'm
Joe.
here for hire, yeah.
You should send them your resume, and it's just like you, because those speeches are good.
All of my fic speeches. Oh my God.
All
no,
your
I've done
fic speeches? Yeah.
so many best, and they're always best men speeches, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Like, I did some in The Martian, I did some in The Newsroom, I did some in
Will
the
Penn
fic I
and will
Deleted.
Penn and Colin get a wedding? Do you think they'll get a wedding?
So it's kind of a joke that's very... The next thing that I would probably write for Penn and Colin would be kind of their companion one-shot series, which I think would be The End of All the Endings, since their book is very much Reputation. I'm a Swiftie.
You said The End of All the Endings?
Which is a line
That's
from...
what the name would be?
Yeah, it's a line from... I'm blanking on which song it is on Reputation, but like I listened to like the instrumental version of Reputation, like because the song is Don't Read the Last Page, But I Stay, which is a line from New Year's Day, which is my favorite Taylor Swift song, or one of them. Mastermind is my absolute favorite. Shocker. But like the title was so important to me. This is actually interesting because I wanted it to be like the Don't Read the Last Page part felt very like Penn to me, in terms of like,
Yeah.
it's about writing and it's about writing your own story. And then the But I Stay felt very much like Colin to me, in terms of like he needs to like come into his own and like stand and stay for like what he really believes in. And so like the duality of that really attracted me to that title.
Oh, I love that.
Well, thank you.
So, the future of the Usverse is We don't know in terms of what the next big one's going to be. You're going to TBD look for inspiration after season 3.
Not committing to anything yet. Yes.
Potentially it could be Daphne and Simon, but potentially not. It's TBD until season 3 happens.
Yes.
So in the meantime, maybe perhaps we get this Edwina fic, or we get the Pollen one-shots.
Yes, and just the series there.
Where we may or may not get a Pollen wedding.
Pollen,
And may or may not get your first best woman speech, or maid of a best woman. If it was Elle, it would be best woman, maid of honor speech.
Elle is giving the speech. I do know. So we talk a little, some of their stuff gets out. The other thing with like the future shots is I have to be really certain that whatever I'm writing in sort of a future fic is not tread on at all by like any of the main action. And so like if something is like, well, maybe I would want that in the Fran book, it's hard for me to like commit. I don't want to like do that. The Call and Pen wedding, like one of the running jokes, which I think is picked up in one of the one shots, is they get engaged fairly quickly. Like they would get engaged, like their storyline in the Ben Sophie version would like end with them getting engaged.
Oh, okay.
But then they take a little bit of time and they're not like in a rush to get married. And I think they're both they're, I think, at the end of the story, Call just turned 30 because that's where he inherits his, 50 million hard cash, as one does. And then Pen, I think, is 26. So they're a little bit on the younger side of when like Aunt settles down. So they end up getting married in like 2022-ish. And at one point, I have this like vision of like Call being like, let's get married at Aubrey Hall. And Pen being like, absolutely not. Do you remember at your sister's wedding where you said you would never date me at Aubrey Hall after I hooked up with you in a closet? Absolutely not. So they end up getting married. Freddie loans them the palace and they get married in Kensington Gardens. And then they end up having
like you do.
Yeah, just casual, like, oh, hey, like, you want my palace? Like, I know you crashed here before, like, you and your girlfriend, like, really found your own place. Like, just come get married in Kensington Gardens. But then, and I think some people know this, because I put it on the internet, they do end up having, like, 3 kids that they give C names because it's following kind of both of their families' little traditions.
Is that in the one-shot notes?
No, it's tagged on my Twitter page, which I don't go to a lot anymore, but Leaf helped me with family trees back in the day, like back in December.
Yeah.
And so it has all of their kids and birth dates. Yeah, so they've got a Charlotte, they've got a Christopher, and then they've got a Clementina Eloise.
Christopher, you got to pay homage to the middle name that we gave Colin.
Yes, so he is a little bit named after him. The us versus Colin Christopher Rokesby Bridgerton is his full name.
That's right. Oh, that's right, Rokesby. Thank you.
Also, shockingly, a lot of research.
Not shocked. And now that we have officially chatted, never will be shocked that there is research involved in that. So, do you have any other research to share with us?
I've actually figured out all of their I have a whole thing with all of their charts, actually.
Wait, is this online? Did you do... Okay, will you share it with me and I'll share it with everybody else?
I don't know if I put it online, but Ant is a Virgo. His birthday is September 4th because that's when Beyonce's birthday is. Kate is a Sag with a Cap rising, or a Cap moon and a Libra rising. Call is a Leo. Pen and Ben are both Aquariuses. Pen's birthday is Valentine's Day, like in this fic. Like, I don't care what canon is. But like people are like, that's not Call's birthday. And I'm like, it is because I say it is.
Like, hey, it's about astrology right now. Suspend disbelief, buddy.
Right. Let's see. I have like an actual spreadsheet where I worked all of this out.
Well, send it to me. I want to link it.
I'll grab it. Yeah.
Okay. This is the point in the podcast where I gather one top tier favorite rec from our authors. I'm very excited today because I get to gather 2 recommendations from you. One for Kate and Ant, and one for Call and Pen. So let's start in the equation of us order. What is your all-time favorite Kate Ant fic?
So it's hard for me to just pick one, even though you gave me like two.
I know. That's a part of it, though, because I want to know top tier.
So,
And I know it changes. Like, I could ask you this next week and it would be something different. So, but right now, this very moment, when I say fave fic, what was the one that popped into your head?
okay, this is very hard. I'd say most eligible, which I think gets a lot of love. It's a very, very well written fic.
Yeah.
Like it's a modern Bachelor AU verse where like Ant decides to go on The Bachelor to like solve his problems.
And it's such a good premise, though, because it is very much giving episode 1 of season 2.
Right. And like, I think I have a really hard time with, like, this is why I went in the direction that and the author and I have spoken about this a bit, like, that
really?
I went in the direction because like, I wanted a really credible way of having this absurd premise, but make it modern. And The Bachelor is just like perfect for that in terms of like,
Yeah.
it's an absurd show, but then, and like I followed a lot of Bachelor and I can't watch it anymore because it's too ridiculous and has too much
I was going to
baggage.
say, I was an early Bachelor, Bachelorette fan because I am a sucker for real feelings.
Oh, so good.
Now it's celebrity. It's about celebrity now.
I think it's on The Ringer, which does some of my favorite cultural commentary, but there was a great podcast episode about how the rise of influencers basically destroyed the Bachelor franchise.
Yeah.
But Most Eligible does a really great job of like having this premise and giving you the ridiculousness of this like man being like, well, I'll just get married without feelings in
Yeah.
2015 or 2020 or whatever. And then just like pulls you in and then just like it's a fish hook tug on the belly button because like suddenly it becomes much more about grief and intimacy and healing from trauma than it is about any of these things. But you've still got this like
Yeah.
kind of they're making a deal, they're falling for each other without really naming it. That is just very delightful. And I don't think I'm very angsty of a writer, but I also love stakes and like I can't write things
Yeah.
without stakes. And I think there's sometimes an automatic like, well, if it's not purely fluff, or like if you have like, you know, a love interest like Sienna, or you have Call actually really truly hurt Penn, like that's not fluff, or that's not an HEA, or that's not romance. Yeah. And I don't think that's true. So like all of my recs are a little bit like you get
complex,
flawed, gray, complex
Yeah.
characters. And this is a great example of that.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm so excited to be able to because I mean, you lived in Aunt Kate world, like for real. For a long time, you lived in that world. So I was so excited to get your recommendation for your favorite Kate Aunt, and does not disappoint. Does not disappoint.
It is,
So I'm
it's
glad that we get to share that with everybody else. It is, and it's interesting. Yeah. So thank you for that. Now, so what is your all-time favorite Call Penn fic?
So I think this is probably a popular choice, but I'm going to give it to City Lights by Lazy Tuesday Morning.
It's okay if it's popular. There's a reason it's popular.
I think popular things are popular for a reason, right? I love City Lights because it is like dirty and they are super flawed and there are a bunch of stakes and like it is like she is like sniffing his jacket. They are like, as she's like taking it on a date with another man, like they are like having some really like, it sounds like, you know, really fun, sexy times. And they're both like miserable. And like, you can just like see this Penn like outside of a club, like smoking a cigarette, hating herself for smoking the cigarette and having this like world weary sigh. And like that sort of level of like jadedness and maturity, you don't see a ton of, but like, I love it. And I think they also, that fic has a really good Portia and Penn vibe that I think is very realistic, where like Penn and her, like Penn loves her mother, but she finds her very emotionally heavy to deal with. And Call kind of comes and rescues her for that, which I think is great.
I totally agree. What I love about Lazy Tuesday Morning is that she creates, and this word is so used so much, but she creates a vibe.
It's so vibesy.
Yes, and the way she world builds an environmental feeling.
And you're so tired. Like, you feel how tired. It's so, like,
Yes.
it's a physical writing. Like,
Physical writing. So well put.
you get burned out by Eloise. You get overwhelmed by Daff. Like, there's just such a good level of weariness and realness. And then it just ends on this kind of, like, hopeful, light place.
Oh my gosh, we have run out of time. Thank you so much, Jo, for your insights, for your recommendations, and letting us record your excerpt, and really all the time that you spent with us today. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, and thank you. This was, as I said, a little nerve-wracking, but this was such a lovely conversation, and you create such a great space, so I really appreciate it.
That wraps another episode of the Fix and Rex podcast. Thank you for listening and supporting us. Links to a regular Jo's AO3 author profile, the Equation of Us series, the Us-verse family tree, and character zodiac signs, as well as Jo's fic recommendations, can all be found on the Fix and Rex social media pages. Join us next time for more fan fiction, conversations, and recommendations. Until then, I'm WMN. Happy reading.